Hello and welcome back to TechMaker. In this episode, we're going to take a quick look at classes and subclasses in ES6. So as usual, we'll jump into our node console. And in here, we're just going to do a couple of quick examples with classes. So to actually get started, we'll just write class, and then we'll give it a name. So we'll call this class dog, just open it with a curly brace, and hit enter. When we define a class, we need to define one function called the constructor, which is what runs when we call new on the class. So we'll say constructor, and then we'll take an argument of name, and then another open curly brace. And then what we need to do is say this.name equals name, semicolon, and then close the curly brace. Now what we're going to do is define another function. We'll just call it bark. Doesn't take any arguments, open curly brace. And we can actually make use of variables that are stored on an instance of the dog. So for example, when we say this.name, what's happening is that the name is being set on this specific instance of dog. And you'll see what an instance is in a second. If you're familiar with object-oriented programming, this is extremely easy stuff. But we'll just console.log out a string, and so we'll give it a backtick, which is above the tab key if you're not familiar, and we'll just say, let's say rough, my name is, and then this is called string interpolation in ES6, I believe. Basically what this is letting us do is instead of having to split the string up and do a bunch of pluses and stuff, we wrote one string and then we can pass variables inside this $sign curly braces syntax. So we'll close that and then we'll close that. So now we can say something like let Fred equal new dog, and then we'll pass in Fred. And then we say Fred.bark, and we'll get our rough my name is Fred. So if you're not familiar with object-oriented programming, what's happening here is that the dog class is sort of a blueprint for creating a dog, right? So when I said earlier that this is an instance variable, what this means is that when I say let Fred equal new dog, the dog is the blueprint, and new is going to create a new instance of it with this name in there. So this being an instance variable means that only this instance gets access to this variable. So if I cycle up and I say let Sarah equal new dog Sarah, then we can say Sarah.bark, and it's a completely different dog. And if we actually look at Sarah and we look at Fred, you can see they're different objects. So that's all really simple, but this is an extremely useful tool inside of ES6 that I use pretty often. The last little bit I want to touch on is subclasses. So I don't know if this is like pure subclasses like you have in like Ruby or Java or something like that. I'm not entirely sure about like the mechanics in the background, but you can do something where you say like class husky extends dog, and then what we can do is just define bark. So we'll say bark, and then we'll say console.log and then same kind of deal we did before. And that should be good there. And now we can say like let's call them Jack equals new husky, and then we can say jack.bark, and we get that back. So you can see that essentially we didn't have to redefine the constructor because it was already defined in the dog class, which we extended. And then we just did what's called overriding the bark method to make it more husky specific. And if you don't know why that's funny, go look up husky videos on YouTube. And if you're a dog person, you will really enjoy it. Anyway, that is it for this episode. I hope you found this little tip useful, and I hope you managed to use it somehow. I will talk to you next time.